So now it's time for the second part of our PDW, which has to do with the initiatives and interventions. And we've got three speakers. First, we'll have Dr. Hood, then Dr. McGee, and then I'll close things out talking about some of the work we're doing at Rutgers. So, Dr. Hood, go right ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for the opportunity to share some of the things that we're doing in Birmingham. I've entitled my section, Civic Innovation, Connecting the Campus to the Community in Birmingham. Just a little stats about Birmingham. By population, we have the fourth largest African-American population in the city. I think that's behind cities such as Philadelphia and Atlanta and Washington, D.C. And I work at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, which actually is the largest employer in the state. We have over 20-something thousand employees, and it's really an economic driver, not only for the city of Birmingham, but also for the state of Alabama. And so we are an anchor institution here, and so we drive a lot of innovation on campus because we're one of the top academic medical centers that brings in funding from the NIH for biomedical research. We're planting a flag around precision medicine and genomics. And then we're trying to commercialize that technology. But what we're realizing is that we really need to build a bench. We really need to build a whole ecosystem around technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So much that we went through a strategic planning process a couple of years ago as a university, and we added economic development, community engagement, and innovation to the strategic pillars of the UAB strategic plan. And so our goal is to make sure that we're totally integrated into the region. That means developing partnerships with our corporate community, our nonprofit community, elected officials, and others. And so we know that we need to be integrated in the K-12 system because that is going to be the pipeline that's coming into UAB and it's going to be partnering with the university. So I'm going to talk about our incubator. We have a off-campus incubator, which is just a couple of blocks from the actual formal campus, and it's called Innovation Depot. We have over 100 startup companies in that Innovation Depot. We have some of the traditional programming there, including an accelerator program called the Velocity Accelerator Program. We run like one cohort a year, typically having anywhere from 7 to 10 startups. A few years ago, we were able to recruit a mother and daughter team from Nashville, Tennessee, to come and work on their startup. Interestingly about this startup, it's called Mixtros, and it's a virtual networking and technology platform. These two African-American women were not in tech, so they were kind of like a double, triple minority, being African-American women and non-tech founders of a startup company. But they came here. Our accelerator program will invest $50,000 into your startup as you're going through it. Around the time they were going through their program, Steve Case, he has this initiative called Rise of the Rest, where he takes his bus around the country and invests in these underinvested, overlooked, and underestimated communities and founders. Birmingham was a stop on his trail. This company, Mixtros, pitched, and they won $100,000 from Steve Case's Revolution Fund. Mixtros went on to take on other funding and actually hit $1 million in startup funding, making them only the 27th and the 28th African-American women to ever raise $1 million for a startup, which was exciting for us in Birmingham because it really showed that, hey, we can do this. But it's also discouraging for many of the reasons that you guys have mentioned. That why is it that here in what was then 2018, they're just now raising $1 million as African-American women for a startup. And so these are things that we know that we have to address if we want to drive inclusive economic growth across our city. One of those investors is a local organization called Bronze Valley. Bronze Valley is a VC shop as well as an accelerator program that typically invests in startups founded by people of color. And so they've invested in them. Just in the last couple of weeks, they've announced that they partnered with an organization called Generator, which is a national network of accelerator programs. And so they are going to be bringing in 15 startup companies that are minority founders and taking them through their process. And so that's going to be a very vital aspect of our local ecosystem here in Birmingham. Now, I mentioned Innovation Depot, which is our startup accelerator, startup incubator. It's in an area what we call the Innovation District. And so this Innovation District, as you can see here, this is the Innovation District. It abuts our historic Civil Rights District. We have here what we would consider one of our Black Wall Streets, where at the early 1900s, this was one of the places where if you're an African-American business owner, this is one of the few places that you can actually have a company and not have interference from white supremacists and others that would interfere with your the operations of your business. That Civil Rights District is now going through a lot of revitalization. And so we have an initiative right now that's being led by two of our traditional economic development organizations to connect our historic Civil Rights District with our Innovation District. And by connecting those two districts, we're hoping to drive more inclusive economic growth, because there's so much technology entrepreneurship that's going on in the Innovation District, but less so in our Civil Rights District. In our Civil Rights District, we have our Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and we have a lot of merchants, which typically they are non-technical companies, but we want to drive and include that technology over in our Civil Rights District. And so I'm actually on the board of one of the organizations that's driving that. It's an organization called Urban Impact, which has been around about 40 years with a focus on supporting African-American businesses. So this is an initiative that is supported and partnered with our UAB, as well as our local utility, Alabama Power, as well as our mayor's office. And in Birmingham, you'll see a lot of the same players that are involved in these initiatives. We've also planted a flag around smart cities. We know that smart cities is going to be incredibly important to make sure that we're driving inclusive economic growth, not just in the area in and around where UAB is, but out into our neighborhoods. Because in Birmingham, we're separated by 99 neighborhoods. And so how do we make sure that all this great technology and innovation that's happening on campus actually gets out into the communities where the majority of African Americans live here in Birmingham? We also have an initiative called Innovate Birmingham. This was funded by a Department of Labor grant towards the end of President Obama's administration. We got that grant. It's a multi-million-dollar grant. A UAB faculty member was one of the PIs. The goal of that grant is to train 945 underrepresented founders, underrepresented young people in in-demand technology skills. So we're teaching them about Python and SQL and all these different in-demand technology skills, because we've done research and we found that a lot of the jobs that we have in Birmingham are at risk of disruption because of technology, automation, and machine learning. We knew that prior to COVID, but now that we have COVID and the disruption that's happened, that's increased the urgency that we need to make sure that we're training up our workforce with people who have the technology skills to either go into one of the companies here in Birmingham or start their own company. Lastly, I'll talk about an initiative called the Education Farm. Here you see Apple CEO Tim Cook. Back in February, right before we shut down because of COVID, Apple made a commitment to support this program. Apple has a program called Everyone Can Code and Everyone Can Create, where they provide this software program and curriculum to train K through 12 teachers as well as higher ed teachers in in-demand coding skills, based primarily on their proprietary Swift coding language. And so Apple has made an investment in our local education farm, and we're trying to spread that out through our K through 12 system as well as our education system. So we're hoping that, again, by building this bench of folks, these are people that are going to go into work in our startup companies, but also going to be able to have the skills necessary to start their own technology companies. So with that, that marries what we're doing on campus with what's going on in our community. And with that, I will entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hood. I think that we'll take the questions at the end of Dr. Robinson's presentation. So please, everyone, note your questions so you don't forget them after the next two presentations. So please, next we have Dr. McGee. Whenever you're ready to share.
Thank you, Professor Hood, for that enlightening presentation. I happen to know that mother-daughter entrepreneurial pair in Nashville, and after your presentation, I vow to support everything they do. So thank you again. My name is Ebony McGee. I am an associate professor of diversity and STEM education in Peabody College at Vanderbilt University. And when I first arrived at Vanderbilt 8.5 years ago, 9 years ago, I was immediately drawn to a statistic. And the statistic at that time, 9 years ago, were African Americans were 2.3% of all engineering faculty. Here I am 9 years later, and African Americans are 2.3% of all engineering faculty. It jumped up to 2.4, it jumped back down. It has just really remained beyond stagnant at this point. And we know that this has ramifications related to who goes into doctoral degree programs, but I believe the pipeline is a very simplistic explanation for what is happening to Black doctoral students and why they are not either pursuing or being pursued to become engineering faculty. So with that in mind, me and my co-founder, Dr. William Robinson, a professor of electrical engineering at Vanderbilt University, we founded Explorations in Diversifying Engineering Faculty Initiative because we knew that even a small cohort of Black faculty could change the face of university engineering. That's me in the roller skates there. Just wanted to kind of humanize myself. So the first thing we looked at is STEM mentoring programs for doctoral students. And I don't have to read off the many benefits of a mentoring program. But when we looked at mentoring folks who are minoritized, who face multiple forms of marginalization, and we looked at this across some years, you can see there's very little programming targeted towards the experiences and challenges that underrepresented folks experience. And the mentoring programs themselves seem to really focus on fixing the student while leaving the system, which is racially hostile, hostile to women, hostile particularly to women of color. The system kind of remained the same, and the student was supposed to kind of fix or assimilate themselves to fit within this very racialized system. So we knew that that is not the approach that we wanted to take, but we wanted to be grounded in understanding what are some of the factors that don't have to do necessarily with the academics, but have to do with the environment. How is this place and space being impacted, and how are students of color coping with that? So we got some panels together where we got some psychologists, some sociologists, some folks who talked about historians, the history of STEM. You know, the history of STEM being steamed in race and steamed in militaristic, steamed in being competitive. Still now we want to be China. We don't want to build communities. So really understanding from the ground up what the students and faculty may be experiencing and how they're grounded in these ideologies and theories that are largely outside of engineering. And then with that, when we were armed with that, we were able to build a coaching program for African-American doctoral students that focused on the things that we saw earlier. It's still how to write a cover letter, it's very important, but it was also how to deal with being racially isolated, how to advocate for yourself in a lab where you're the only person of color, and other things that were really important to the totality of the experience. So looking at their trajectories more holistically and not taking a colorblind approach to success in engineering. One of the things we also realized is that the current goals of our doctoral and our undergrad students were very like STEM traditional, you know, an engineer, an astrophysicist, you know, real STEMmy stuff. But when you ask them about their future goals, that is when the entrepreneurship just kind of sticks out to you. So they want to be really kind of trailblazing, but trailblazing in a way where they're really focused on decreasing inequities through and sometimes beyond their engineering work. And they really felt a disconnect with being able to be a traditional engineer at the workplace and really being able to kind of flex more of what they are passionate about. So one of the things that my work is leading to do now, and that's why I'm so excited about being part of this entrepreneurial team, is that I get to kind of reimagine what STEM or engineering looks like if it was equitable, if it was anti-racist, if it was inclusive of all creeds and all different abilities, so different able-bodied persons, folks who have different levels of neurodiversity, you know, et cetera, what would that look like? And my vision of what that looks like is this. So I want the goal for Black doctoral students not to necessarily go to work for a Google, a Microsoft, a Twitter, even though that is great if they decide to do that. But what about being a Google? What about being a Twitter, right? Of course, with a different name, you know, why is the goal for doctoral students to go work for someone else in their racialized, hostile environments, you know, helping to make them succeed? And we're still paid less, you know, in those particular fields. So I wanted a different vision for that. And then working with this team has allowed me to take the coaching program, which is called Professor Abound. And now I'm adding entrepreneurship to that, because you can be a professor and be an entrepreneur at the same time, and they don't have to be disparate goals. You know, they can be overlapping goals. And to really help, the workshop the training will be focused on really leveling the playing field for entrepreneurs of color. So everything that the previous panelists just talked about, you know, will be incorporated into the program. So you can certainly learn more about my research and the upcoming work that I'm doing and my thrust towards entrepreneurship in my book that's coming out October 2020. And I have some great websites that have lots of free content for better understanding some of the ideas I presented today. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Fantastic, Dr. McGee. This is great. Thank you. Next would be Dr. Robinson. And again, after Dr. Robinson, we'll have the question and answer portion of the PDW, this last section.
Hey, that was really fantastic. And I really try to live up to the last two presentations. They did some great, not only great in terms of what they did presentation-wise, but the work that they're doing is really fantastic. Let me use this as my starting point. What do we want to see? And maybe this kind of picks up on the theme Dr. McGee just gave us here. Do we want to see inclusive environments, inclusive workplaces, and inclusive innovation? I mean, this classroom is certainly diverse. This group of people who we supported through a program that was federally funded, you know, they were a diverse set of entrepreneurs. And one of the programs that we have that focuses on Black and Latinx technology entrepreneurs is designed to be part of the feeder, the pipeline for accelerators. That kind of gives you an overview of what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do. I want to talk about three different initiatives very quickly. One or two of them are based out of Rutgers, and the third one is the National Science Foundation funded GEM Inclusion and Innovation Initiative. The Queued Pipeline Initiative was funded initially by the Minority Business Development Agency, which is part of the Department of Commerce. They gave us funding to support entrepreneurs who already had businesses who would be interested in applying to the SBIR program. Now, we've heard a lot about SBIR on this PDW, but one of the biggest challenges with that program is just the application process, understanding how it works, who's eligible, and these kinds of things. There are a lot of details if you're going to try to do that program. We had the academic research that told us about who was applying, how they were applying, what the success rates were. We had all the technical details, but the intervention in this case was to create the boot camp and the initiative that brought people together, trained them how to do this. They already had business skills, but in particular, how to support them going through the SBIR program. Let me talk about the second one very quickly. The GEM National GEM Consortium, which is the GEM Fellowship folks. I'm one of the folks many years ago who received a fellowship from this organization to pursue my graduate degree in engineering. They are now looking at innovation. In particular, they're trying to understand how to get more diversity, equity, and inclusion into the NSF I-Corps program. Again, we've talked about the research in the beginning parts of this PDW, but now some of the research is running in parallel with this programmatic aspect here. And to show you where the intervention is actually taking place, this is a graphic that shows you how the National Innovation Corps program works. And starting from the regional levels and the various different teams and training, and then entering into the national program. And the challenge, of course, is that, as I showed you the statistics before, it's not as diverse as it could be. This GEM consortium initiative does something here on the diagram, where you can see that the intervention is on the front end, getting underrepresented minorities who are already engaged in STEM graduate degrees at the master's and the PhD level to understand what I-Corps is all about, and to participate either as entrepreneurial leads, technical leads, but in some way be involved in an I-Corps program at a regional level or a hub level. And so this program has various different aspects of the program that are interventions. I won't go through all of them right now, but I will say this, that in combination of workshops and webinars and convenings and learning community, the GEM consortium is just at the beginning of trying to make a difference in the diversity, equity, and inclusion in the National I-Corps program. If they can make some headway there, and then we have some different things to report in the years to come. And then last but not least, we have at Rutgers University Black and Latinx Technology Program, which has several components. You can go to blackandlatinotech.com and find out more. The main component is to create a pre-accelerator for Black and Latinx founders. We were meeting with so many people who were interested in getting into accelerators in Newark, New Jersey, in New York City, in other places in the Rutgers region, and yet they weren't getting looked at with any seriousness. And so we developed some relationships, and think of our role in this as initially as only social capital and human capital development, but we learned that the financial capital was also a stumbling block. And so we took what was a pre-accelerator program and we added to it a financial component. And that's where sort of our thesis, our theory of change takes off. It's not just about getting these pre-seed stage or seed stage entrepreneurs engaged with the accelerators. It's also finding and identifying angel investment funding so that they can have that $50, $100, $150,000 necessary to get to the point where they can get noticed and in some of the leading incubators and accelerators. And so our geographical focus is in the greater Newark and New Jersey region. And then we're focusing on tech and tech-enabled companies and growth businesses. And our goal is to provide that angel investment for the Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. So that gives you an overview of some of the things that are, I would call interventions and initiatives from our side, and you heard from two other people as well. But this is where all the things that we've talked about in terms of research find their way into practice.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. Yeah, so we have questions saved up, so please, panelists, please engage on all three of the intervention mentioned by the scholars.
Hey, Dr. Robinson, on that pre-accelerator program, where does the funding come from for that? And is that non-dilutive capital? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So in order to run the program initially, we got a grant from the Surdna Foundation. So that's the sort of the source funding for running the pre-accelerator program. The funding for the angel investment has been generated from the community. You know, we put a call out. We're still putting a call out for those folks who are willing to put in, you say, you know, over the next 5 years, $50,000. But what that means is you can get a half share or a full share for, you know, as little as $5,000 a year. So that's being generated from the community. There is some talk at the state level in New Jersey that there may be some matching funding, but you know, we'll see if that materializes.
Great. Do we have any next question, please?
Yes, I just have one question for the panelists. In particular, in my anecdotal conversations, and then this research that needs to be conducted, I'm not aware of any that has. I've heard from angel investors that women of color are not coming to the table to request funding for tech-based startups. They're primarily focusing on non-tech startups. And so this is being used as one of the reasons why you're not seeing the kind of support, right, and the levels, right, amounts of money support. Are you all seeing this? Again, anecdotal, you know, conversations. Are you all seeing this in your programs? Are you cultivating particularly tech-based and even, you know, deep tech, as our I-Corps friends at NSF would like to say? Are you emphasizing that? Are you seeing the need in your environments or not?
Who wants to start? I guess it's me then, huh? I mean, I definitely have seen sort of the cultivation of these tech entrepreneurs. We're fortunate to be in a, you know, technology-oriented area. We've got New Jersey and New York have lots of STEM-oriented companies, from the pharmaceutical industry to you know, high finance, folks who are in IT, folks who are in you know, lots of different tech and tech-enabled areas. So we haven't found a lack of people. They're out there. And he talked about women entrepreneurs. We know that this is a hot area for it because there's a group called Digital Undivided who's looking across the country at where they should put one of their next incubator. And they chose Newark, New Jersey, because they realized what we realized was that there were lots of women, in particular women of color, in the area who were interested in creating their ventures. But the question is, what happens next? Do you have access to you know, the process? I mean, maybe you were trained in IT. Just because you're trained in IT doesn't mean you were trained in entrepreneurship or in startups. And so, you know, having that opportunity there. And then the second step to me is, you know, connecting them to those VCs, those angel investors, and getting the pitches and getting the practice to do that. One other dimension I've found is you know, what's in our mind as to what the typical tech entrepreneur is, how old they are, what their living situation is. And what I find often in you know, communities of color is you know, some of this is not happening as a 20-something. This is not something that happens all the time for people who are 22 years old, just graduated college, and now they're ready to go start their startup, and you know, they don't have they have hardly any debt or real big responsibilities. So for many communities of color, some of this happens later on in their sort of life and career. And so the risks are different. And so you have to, you know, one of the concerns is, can we lower the risk profile? So you don't have to quit your job, and you can do some of this. And again, the programs that we've run and other folks have run in the area that I've mentioned have taken that into account and said, well, you don't have to quit your job. This is going to run in parallel, something you're going to do at night, something you're going to do for a short period of time intensively, and so that you don't have to give up your day job right away. So I think all those are factors. And I always joke that when I hear the angel investors say things like, we can't find anybody, we don't see them, that means, to me, that means really not looking.
And I love to chime in on that as well. I think we would be remiss not to bring up differences in social capital and how some of the majority founders are able to tap in and do a friends and family round and raise a significant amount of capital, whereas a lot of our African-American led companies don't have that kind of access to that social and financial capital. And so you have that issue. I would say the other issue is, what happens after you get the VC funding, whether it's angel funding or what have you. The challenge that we've been running into in Birmingham is the same companies that have touted our minority companies, that have even invested in them, won't do business with them. And so you have corporations that have an ability to maybe give them a contract through the procurement process or through the supply chain, and then they're not able to successfully get that business. So we like to put them on the cover to say, hey, look at us, we're inclusive. We got Black women that have tech companies. But then you ask them like, but have you given them a contract? Oh, well, it's always an excuse. And, there are a lot of companies around here that have not taken on any venture capital, but because they've been successful at getting contracts, their revenues far exceed what some people would call vanity metrics of, okay, you raised $1 million, so what? There's nothing significant really about raising $1 million other than the PR that comes along with it. But if you can build a sustainable business and then get access to these contracts, then it reduces your dependency not only on VC but also debt funding from traditional banks. And so I think that's a part of the conversation that we need to make sure that we're keeping lifted up.
Dr. one question. So when you find the investments from the VC, do they take kind of the role, like a lot of time they might shepherd you through some of the early stages or open up their social network to you? Or are you saying that that's been kind of suppressed in there through not giving business, but are those other things in terms of helping you in like the structure of your board or those other activities? Do you see any involvement from the VC community once they invest in a company? Or is that investment in there basically no longer really involved in the activities that help it grow?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to systemic biases and just institutional racism. Whereas, you have a lot of the VCs and angel capital that we have here does not invest in businesses here. It invests outside of here. And so oftentimes, companies here have to go out and get externally validated to say, oh, I'm getting venture funding in Atlanta, or I've landed a contract at the Atlanta airport. And once somebody externally validates you, then people will invest in you locally. And particularly when you're talking about founders of color, just the scrutiny on us, everybody wants to go through, your sock drawer, they want to pull out all this other stuff, and they have all these reasons why you may not have a viable business model, but it seems like our majority colleagues don't face the same type of scrutiny. But at the same time, I think individually, the VCs are wanting to do the right thing. They want to open up their networks. But if those VCs are not here, then they're opening up their networks outside of here, which is great, because you don't want to be totally dependent on just your local community. But man, it feels good when people locally believe in you and invest in you.
I think connecting to Dr. Hood's point and Dr. Monroe White's point earlier, about the systemic issues. I think there's a very interesting experiment unfolding here at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem. As you may know, a few years ago, the university decided to start a new engineering program focused on biomedical and life sciences, but the focus in terms of the students and the faculty was primarily on getting women into STEM fields. So right now, 60% of the faculty in this program are women, and they're young, star faculty from various places. 42% of the students are women, and 20% are from underrepresented communities. And I think part of it is taking our research, but prompting institutions to say, we have to build some new institutions. Sometimes we can't fix the existing institutions or change it, no matter how hard we may have advocates or allies, right? We have to just try to experiment and do something else, and then if it's successful, quickly replicate it. I still don't know how it's going to unfold and if it's going to work and it'll be sustainable, but at least it's an effort to try to do that, because I think Dr. Monroe White's point was right on the mark. How do we get talented women to come to the table and pitch? And part of it's making sure there's women partners on the other side who are going to be receptive and keep the old boy network in line too, right? And keep them open. But I think building some of these new institutions too. And I think, I was thinking about this with the memorial service for John Lewis. I was really touched by that. I learned something new in watching his service. I knew he had been influenced by Gandhi, but I didn't know the extent to which his nonviolent teachings were influenced. And I think there's an opportunity, being someone from the Indian community, how do we reach out? We care about social justice as everyone does. And so I think that's something else that kind of my takeaway from this is thinking about how to bring social justice and empowerment into this research effort and the teaching that we do.
That's good. That's good. I just wanted to make one more connection here. And so is Dr. McGee and Dr. Bradley, you all were talking about some interesting parallels there. And I wanted you all to comment on this, because when you started talking about the professors and the STEM, the pipeline up to engineering professors. And then Dr. Bradley, you were talking about, what people are incentivized to do and not do. It just seems that there's even more of a challenge for Black and Brown and other underrepresented minorities who are pursuing the PhDs and the faculty route. There seems to be more barriers to the entrepreneurship side. So I don't know if you all saw that connection, but I did. I wanted you all to kind of talk that out just a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's ironic that many doctoral students think that they have to choose between being an entrepreneur and being a professor. So the entrepreneurial professor is not given a lot of attention, even though many Black engineering faculty are also entrepreneurs. But ironically, they are entrepreneurs for social justice. So for an example, they have a lab and the lab is very technological, and then they'll have a side program where they bring high school students in from the Atlanta area and teach them about some of the technologies in the lab. And unfortunately, when it comes to tenure and promotion, that type of work is not valued. It's not even seen as true entrepreneurship. It is under the tag of service. So here they are building a retention model to show young Black students in Atlanta how they can be professors too, and it is not valued at all. So they said it's kind of their side gig. They do it out of the love of the community and being that Black professor, for students to see and role model. But it is definitely, it's a disconnect between that and what the traditional STEM community honors in terms of promotion and tenure. And one more point, it is almost expected if you're a Black engineering faculty that you have a program like that.
And just piggybacking on that, yeah, I do kind of have a program like that. And so and we do a lot in the community with the high schools, and even trying to extend it to my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee now. And so it's not something we're talking with the dean and is making this as something of value. But right now it's something you need to do, because you need to strengthen the pipeline. You need to demonstrate that there's many ways that you can apply skills that you have, and technology is one very fun expression. And so trying to do that, and it takes time away from perhaps your publication in the Journal of Mechanical Design. It might fit more with ASEE, and so you have to be able to convince that that's okay in the Department of Engineering that you have a journal that paper, as well as in your standard mechanical design and engineering domain space as well. So you have to be able to demonstrate that. But a lot of conversations are around that now. in this environment. So maybe there might be those conversations might become actionable, and those actionable things might create more permanent change. And so that's the hope.
Well, same here. Shameless plug for PhD Prep, an initiative I started to support more of our students going into doctoral programs. And I was inspired by the PhD project, which a lot of us on here are very much familiar with. And so I coach a lot of students on how to apply to the PhD project conference and then go into doctoral programs, and I try to mentor them along the way. So I'm sure probably all of us have some kind of initiative that, you know, we have, because we know how important it is. Somebody invested in us, and so we know how important it is to invest back in the next generation.
Well, look, we have covered a lot of ground in this session, and I want to thank everybody who has participated, and thank those folks who've watched this all the way to the end. But thank you all. I really appreciate your work. Look forward to working with you as we go forward, and look forward to seeing these papers and interventions flourish. Let me turn it over to Eason. He was going to close this out and tell people what they can do to communicate with us.
All right, well, thank you. Such an engaging and informative PDW. It was amazing. Thank you again, like Dr. Robbins said, all the panelists, our division sponsors, ENT, Tim, GDO, again, the attendees. It was an honor and pleasure to chair this PDW with these 6 amazing scholars doing important and high quality work. Please share this PDW. No recorded event these days is complete without a hashtag, a general one and an event specific one, as I learned from Dr. Hood from his amazing LinkedIn stuff. So please don't let this interaction end with just your comments and questions in this portal. If appropriate, reach out to the scholars. We're building the community. This is increasing conversations. And again, reach out, please comment. We'll be monitoring the chat. So this is just not in the ether. So we will be looking out for your comments and questions, and I'll relay them to the appropriate scholars. Again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the 2020 AOM annual meeting. Stay safe and take care.